A question I think every YouTuber always gets are, what are your favorite games of all time? And for me, that's kind of a difficult thing. I sort of have a top 3 in mind when it comes to things like that, but other games I feel like can interchange. You know, there's so many games that I love and so many games that I consider some of my favorites, as I've been playing video games for over 30 years now nearly. So it definitely is a very changeable thing. It's definitely something that can be interchanged with other games. But today I decided I'm finally going to address this question. So I went over my game shelves and I found 10 games that I really love. 10 games I consider to be some of my favorite. Now, of course, these aren't necessarily the best games of all time. There's a reason I favor these games over other games, and there are definitely games missing from this. So maybe in the future, I'll talk about 10 more of my favorite games of all time. But in this video, we're going to go over the first 10, the 10 that caught my eye, and the 10 I feel like talking about today. So sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's get into 10 of my favorite games of all time.
Hey, RGT 85. Hey, Sean.
Oh my God, it's Stevie Richards!
Alright, so starting things off, we're going to talk about an N64 game that had a massive impact on me, and that would be Super Mario 64. Now, the first time I played Super Mario 64 was actually over at my uncle's house. He had gotten an N64 the day it came out with Super Mario 64 and Wayne Gretzky's 3-on-3 hockey. And I remember playing Super Mario 64 and just being blown away by it. Like, when the game starts out and you have that cutscene where the camera sort of pans in and then Mario comes out of the pipe, like, that was just so amazing to me. We had never seen Mario in a 3D world before, and just how lush and how crazy everything was in this 3D world was just so amazing to me. I of course own it on the N64. I picked up the DS version as well. The DS version actually came out when I was a freshman in college, I believe, and I remember picking that up and I would just sit in the little eating area and like skip class and just play that game. Just such an awesome game. It's such a timeless game, so it's definitely one of my favorites of all time. Next up, you guys know I'm a huge Castlevania fan, but as far as favorites go, I would have to say Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow is probably one of my favorite Castlevania games of all time. Now, this game was really interesting because it sort of expanded upon the Symphony of the Night formula, but I think they did a really good job with it. I loved how there was every creature had a soul, and you could take their soul and then use that in your character Soma and really expand upon the game and really change up how the game was played. The game itself was pretty long, and then once you beat it, you got all this additional stuff as well. There was just so much stuff going on in this game. I love the visual style. It was a bit anime at the time, and you know, some people didn't really like that, but I thought it was great. The music in the game was awesome too. It's a game that I definitely return to and play every now and then, just because I love this game. I love so much about it. I love the story in it, and it's just a really well done game. So Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow on the DS, definitely another one of my favorites. This next game was actually very similar in how Super Mario 64 blew me away. This game on the Dreamcast absolutely melted my mind, and that is Shenmue. Now, the first time I played Shenmue, I went to Georgia to visit my best friend at the time, and he had just gotten a Dreamcast, and he was like, dude, I've got this game called Shenmue, and it's gonna blow your mind. And it honestly did. It was this open world where characters had their own life cycles, and stores had their own business hours, and a timer that was consistently going on in a clock so that things would only open and close at certain times. You could go anywhere. You could see anything within these towns. There was an arcade, and just the story of the game was just so engrossing. The gameplay was just so well done and so defined, and there was absolutely nothing like this available at home consoles at the time. It was an absolute genre blending game, so much fun, and so many hours were put into this game and the sequel, and I'm very happy that Shenmue 1 and 2 is coming to modern consoles very soon, because I think it's a game that really needs to be experienced by everyone. It's nearly 20 years old now, and I'd say it's still as good as it was back then as it is now. Just an absolute gem of a game, and definitely one of my favorites. I love the Metal Gear Solid series. I think it's a fantastic franchise, but this honestly was the pinnacle of the series in my opinion, and that is Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Now, this of course is the 3DS version. It first released on the PS2. It was just easier for me to find the 3DS case, but Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was just so great. It was, you know, the first time we could play as Big Boss in the Metal Gear Solid trilogy, or in the Metal Gear Solid games, I should say, and it was just so amazing. I love the camo system of the game. I love how many little intricacies there were and hidden things. I loved all of the animals and how you would have to eat and heal yourself when you got hurt. The characters themselves were very interesting. Maybe some of the bosses were a bit weak in sort of backstory when you compare it to games like Metal Gear Solid 2, where everyone seemed to have a more fleshed out backstory. But I just absolutely loved this game. I love the setting of it. I love the music. It's very atmospheric and it's very cinematic, but it's still a really fun game at the same time as well. I think it had the perfect balance of Metal Gear Solid gameplay with Metal Gear Solid cinema and storytelling, and it's just an absolute masterpiece. Definitely in my top 3 games of all time, and a game that I could play, you know, a million times and never really get bored with it. So Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, another excellent game. Another gaming franchise that I really love is Resident Evil. Now, I'm going to have to give the nod to the OG version of the game, as that's where my love affair started, along like many other people. This is, of course, Resident Evil Deadly Silence on the Nintendo DS, which is the first Resident Evil game with some added touchscreen mechanics thrown in. Once again, it was just easier for me to find this case than it was my PS1 game, but Resident Evil was just really the king of survival horror games. There was other survival horror games that had come out before it, games like Alone in the Dark and stuff like that, but this is the one that really set off the survival horror genre. I remember renting a PS1 with no memory card and a copy of this game and getting up to the yawn as a kid and just being like, this game is so freaking amazing, and then the yawn killed me, and since I didn't have a memory card, I could not continue my progress. Of course, I've beaten the game a million times since then. I really like the DS version of the game though, because you could bring it with you, and I thought the touchscreen stuff was great, but of course the PS1 version is the definitive version, the director's cut version. I like the remake as well, but it doesn't hold the same place in my heart as the original version of the game. So Resident Evil, another absolute masterpiece and a great piece of gaming. It wouldn't be a favorite games list without an NES game, and this NES game might kind of shock some people, but once again, this is just my personal list, and everything sort of has a reason for being on here. So I had an NES, I had games like Mario and Tecmo Bowl and stuff like that, but I remember I was over at a friend's house whose sister was babysitting me, and it was this dude named Joe, and he was like, we were playing NES or whatever, and Joe was like, yo, you ever played Double Dragon? And I was like, what is Double Dragon? Like, that sounds awesome. And then he busted out Double Dragon on the NES, the original, and that game just absolutely melted my mind. It was the first time I had really seen something sort of violent in a video game. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. I didn't know there was games like this where you fight different people and have to kick people's asses. And I just love Double Dragon. The soundtrack of the game is absolutely amazing. I love the chip tunes. It's some of my favorite video game music of all time. And it's just a really fun game. It's a game that, once again, I always seem to pull out and play a couple times a year just because there's so much nostalgia for this game with me. There's just so many fond memories of playing it and just absolutely loving it. So once again, Double Dragon on the NES, a definite favorite in my mind. You gotta have a recent game on this list as well. I won't talk too much about it as I reviewed it. I also said it was my game of the year for 2017, but Super Mario Odyssey. I really feel that this is the best Super Mario game since Super Mario 64 in terms of the 3D games. I love the Galaxy games, but I don't know, this game just really hit home to me. I love the different environments. New Donk City is probably my favorite level in a Mario game ever, just because I love how it blends a real life thing into the Mario universe and does it so seamlessly, and it still all makes sense. It still all works, which is absolutely nuts, and just a fantastic game. In my opinion, the best game on the Switch still, and just an absolute gem. So Super Mario Odyssey, definitely have to put it in my 10 favorites. Now, many will argue that there's better versions of this game, and I probably own better versions of this game, but this one sort of holds a special place in my heart just because it was the first version of the game that I owned on a home console, and that is Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition on the Sega Genesis. Now, I first played Street Fighter II in the arcade, actually in an arcade in a pool in a Marriott. Yeah, I don't know. There was a family friend staying in a Marriott, and we went to visit them so that we could use their pool, and I had to be, I don't know, pretty young, and I was always interested in fighting games, you know, because of things like Double Dragon, but I saw a Street Fighter II arcade cabinet. I don't remember what version it was. It might have been Champion Edition, and I played that game so much I didn't even end up swimming that day. I just kept dumping quarters into it, and this was the first home version that I ever owned, as I owned a Sega Genesis at that time, and I just absolutely loved this game. It was a way for me to experience an arcade hit at home, and it was such a good version of the game as well. You know, on the NES, which I owned as well, there wasn't as many good arcade ports. You know, most of them were severely dumbed down, but this was the first time I felt like I was playing an arcade game at home. So I gotta give a little special love to Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition on the Genesis, just because of that nostalgia factor. You guys know I love my Sega stuff, and this is a game that I definitely keep in my top 10 favorites, just because I thought it was so unique and so different, and you could see what they wanted to do with this. You could see that they wanted to make this a franchise has, and I still think it's a shame that we probably will never see another game in the series, and that is Knights. Now, this is the big box edition, which came with the 3D controller as well. This was the introduction to Sega Saturn's analog stick, because the N64, of course, had an analog stick, and that was all the rage. You saw it with the PS1 getting the DualShock controller, but Knights was just such a fantastic game. I thought it was just so vibrant and colorful, and it might have been a bit cheesy at the time, because I was starting to sort of, you know, enter my early teen years. I love the Knights character. I just thought it was so unique and different in what we saw, and it definitely was just a really groundbreaking game at the time, because I love the 2.5D stuff that they had going on. 2.5D was just sort of starting out, and to see, you know, moving on a 2D plane with these beautiful 3D backgrounds with rich, vibrant polygons going on, it was just such a cool looking game to me. And I remember playing it for hours and hours and hours, trying to get better scores and trying to get faster times. Just such a fun game, and it's still a game that I love to play from time to time. I own it on like practically everything. I, of course, have the Saturn version. I own it on Steam. I own it on the PS4 digital shop. I own it on the Xbox One digital shop. Just an absolute gem of a game, and one of my favorites of all time. And the final game I want to talk about is a game that I think is severely underrated. This released on the PS2, the PSP, and the Nintendo Wii, and we'll be talking about the Wii version of the game, and that is Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Now, I love survival horror games, but this game was really unique in that it did not have any sort of combat. You basically ran away from your demons, and the choices you made while playing this game actually impacted your ending. There was a ton of different endings for your main character, and the things you did, the things you said in the game, the places you went, the things you even looked at, sort of went into a psychological profile for your character. It's pretty much a psych test in a video game, but it was just so unique, and I just absolutely loved the game the first time I played it through, and then I loved it the second time I played it through, because I did things a little bit differently. You know, the first time I played it through, I did things the way I would have done them, and then the second time, I tried to look at myself from a different perspective, and it really changed up how the game ended up being, and things that I saw, and things that I did within the game. It's a really unique game that I think everyone should definitely try out, because it's a real hidden gem in my opinion, and one of the better survival horror games that I've played within the past decade or so. So, Silent Hill, Shattered Memories, a definite favorite game of mine. Alright, and those are 10 of my favorite games of all time. Now, like I said, these are not like the definitive only 10, top 10 favorites or whatever. These are just 10 that I selected. Obviously, there was no Sonic. Obviously, there was no wrestling games and stuff like that, genres that I really love. But these are just 10 games I wanted to talk about, really, and just sort of give a little shine on them and talk about why I like them so much. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know in the comments down below, and maybe I'll do more things like this where I tell personal stories about these games and why they're some of my favorite games of all time. And thank you for watching this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out other videos on the channel as well, and as always, I will catch you guys on the next video. Later.